My name is James, and I once believed I had the perfect life. My wife, Emily, and I lived in a picturesque suburban neighborhood, the kind you'd see on postcards. We had a cozy house with a white picket fence, a neatly manicured lawn, and two beautiful children, Sophie and Jack. Emily was a stay-at-home mom, dedicated to raising our kids and managing the household, while I worked as a project manager at a construction firm. Our community was tight-knit, filled with friendly faces and familiar routines. We'd been married for nearly 15 years, and on the surface, everything seemed idyllic. Emily and I had met in college, and it felt like we were destined to be together. Our relationship had always been full of love and laughter, and we prided ourselves on our open communication. We shared dreams of growing old together, watching our kids flourish, and eventually retiring to a quiet place by the sea. Our home was a haven of warmth and happiness. Family dinners were a cherished tradition, with Emily's delicious meals bringing us all together. On weekends, we'd have barbecues with our neighbors, and the kids would play in the backyard while the adults enjoyed a few drinks and good conversation. Life was simple, predictable, and seemingly perfect. But as I would soon discover, beneath the surface of our perfect life lay secrets that would shatter my world. It began with subtle changes in Emily's behavior, small things that I initially dismissed as stress or fatigue. I had no idea that these were the first signs of a betrayal that would change everything. The first signs were subtle. Emily had always been meticulous about her appearance, but lately she seemed to be putting in extra effort. At first I thought she was just taking more time for herself, and I encouraged it. She started dressing up more often, even when she was just going to the grocery store or picking up the kids from school. Her makeup was always flawless, her hair perfectly styled. I told myself it was harmless, that she simply wanted to feel good about herself. But then there were the phone calls. Emily began receiving calls at odd hours, always stepping out of the room to take them. When I asked who it was, she'd brush it off, saying it was just a friend or something about the kids' school. I trusted her, so I didn't push for details. After all, why would I suspect anything more? Next came the late nights. Emily started going out more frequently, saying she needed some me time or was meeting up with friends. I was supportive, thinking it was healthy for her to have a social life outside of our family. But sometimes, she'd come back home much later than she'd said she would, smelling faintly of alcohol and a perfume that wasn't hers. When I asked her about it, she'd get defensive, saying I was being paranoid and controlling. Our sex life also began to change. Emily became distant, her touch less tender, her kisses less frequent. Intimacy, once a cornerstone of our relationship, dwindled to almost nothing. She always had an excuse. She was tired, stressed, or not feeling well. I tried to be understanding, to be patient, but the growing distance between us was undeniable. Then there were the little lies. I'd catch her in small fibs about where she was, who she was with, or what she was doing. They were always minor things, easily explainable, but they started to add up. My trust in her began to erode, replaced by a gnawing suspicion that something was very wrong. One evening, while Emily was out with friends, I decided to look through her phone. I felt guilty for invading her privacy, but my gut told me I needed to know the truth. She had become more secretive about her phone lately, always keeping it close and setting it face down on the table. When I picked it up, my heart pounded in my chest. Her phone was locked, and I realized I didn't know the new password. That night, I lay awake, my mind racing. I replayed every moment, every conversation, trying to find clues I might have missed. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, caught between wanting to trust my wife and the growing fear that she was hiding something from me. The breaking point came a few days later. Emily had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and I noticed an email notification from someone named Daniel. My hands trembled as I clicked on it. The message was brief but intimate, referencing a dinner they'd shared and making plans to meet again. It was signed, "Looking forward to seeing you, D." I felt a cold wave of dread wash over me. The name was unfamiliar, and the tone of the email was unmistakably affectionate. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more painful than the last. I couldn't believe that the woman I had loved and trusted for so long could be involved with someone else. I confronted Emily that night. She denied everything, of course, claiming that Daniel was just a friend and that I was overreacting. Her defensiveness only fueled my suspicions. Our argument escalated, voices raised and tears shed. She accused me of being paranoid, of not trusting her. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than she was letting on. In the days that followed, I became a detective in my own home, watching for any signs that might confirm my fears. Emily's behavior only grew more erratic, her mood swinging wildly from affectionate to hostile. The tension in our home was palpable, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it might hurt. My suspicions were driving a wedge between us, and I couldn't live in this state of uncertainty any longer. The woman I loved was slipping away from me, and I was desperate to understand why. Emily and I had both planned separate business trips, leaving Sophie and Jack with Emily's parents for the week. It seemed like a good opportunity for us to focus on work and then reunite with our kids over the weekend. I hoped that a bit of time apart might help us clear the air and perhaps even mend the rift that had grown between us. I had a nagging feeling that something was off, though, so I decided to cut my trip short by a day. I didn't tell Emily, wanting to surprise her with my early return. I was hoping that maybe, just maybe, I could use the extra day to have a heartfelt conversation and figure out what was really going on with us. When I arrived home, the house was quiet. Emily's car was in the driveway, which I found odd since she wasn't supposed to be back until the next day either. As I walked through the door, a sense of unease washed over me. Something felt wrong. I made my way through the house, calling out for Emily, but there was no response. I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding with each step. The closer I got to our bedroom, the more I could hear faint noises, sounds that sent a chill down my spine. I pushed the door open, and there they were, Emily and a man I recognized from the photo in the email, Daniel. They were in our bed, tangled in the sheets, completely unaware of my presence. Rage erupted inside me, a volcanic surge of betrayal and anger. I stormed into the room, and they both looked up, their faces a mix of shock and fear. Emily tried to scramble away, covering herself with the blanket, but Daniel was too slow. He stood up, naked and vulnerable, trying to stammer out an explanation. I didn't need to hear his excuses. I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw, sending him sprawling onto the floor. He tried to fight back, but my fury was unstoppable. I landed blow after blow, each punch fueled by the images of their betrayal burned into my mind. Emily screamed, pleading with me to stop, but her voice was drowned out by the roaring in my ears. Bloodied and bruised, Daniel finally managed to push me off and scrambled to his feet, grabbing his clothes and fleeing from the room. Emily rushed to my side, trying to calm me down, but I shoved her away. I couldn't bear to look at her, to hear her lies. The woman I had loved and trusted had shattered our life, and the pain was unbearable. "How could you?" I shouted, my voice raw with emotion. "How could you do this to us? To our family?" Emily sobbed, trying to reach out to me, but I was beyond consoling. I backed away, my mind racing with thoughts of everything we had built together, now reduced to ashes by her betrayal. The love I once felt for her was buried under a mountain of anger and hurt. "I'm so sorry, James," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "It just happened. I didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for this to happen," I repeated, incredulous. "You brought him into our home, into our bed. You made a choice, Emily. You chose to destroy everything we had." I couldn't stay there any longer. I needed to get out, to clear my head. I grabbed my keys and stormed out of the house, leaving Emily sobbing on the floor. I drove aimlessly, the events of the past hour replaying in my mind like a nightmare I couldn't escape. Eventually, I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. The reality of what I had just witnessed hit me like a tidal wave. My marriage was over, the trust irreparably broken. There was no going back from this. I knew I needed to confront Emily again, to get answers and decide on the next steps. But for now, I needed to find a way to calm the storm raging inside me. I needed to think about Sophie and Jack, and how to protect them from the fallout of their mother's betrayal. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. After driving around for hours, I finally found the resolve to return home. The house felt like a battlefield, every corner a reminder of the betrayal I had uncovered. Emily was still there, sitting on the couch with her face buried in her hands. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and detached. I sat down across from her, forcing myself to stay calm. Emily nodded, sniffling. "I'm so sorry, James. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I demanded. "Why did you bring him into our home, into our bed? How long has this been going on?" She took a deep breath, struggling to compose herself. It started a few months ago. I met Daniel at a conference, and we just connected. At first it was just talking, but then it became more. I was lonely, James. You were always so busy with work, and I felt like I was invisible to you. Lonely? I echoed, my voice rising. You think that justifies cheating on me? Destroying our family? No, it doesn't, she said, shaking her head. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you. But I felt so alone, and he made me feel wanted, needed. You could have talked to me, I said, my anger boiling over. We could have worked on it together. But instead, you chose to betray me. You chose to destroy everything we had. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I never wanted to hurt you or the kids. But you did, I said, my voice breaking. You hurt all of us. There was a long silence, the weight of our shattered lives hanging heavy in the air. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with despair. I don't know. I want to fix this, but I don't know how. I love you, James. I don't want to lose you. You already lost me, I said, standing up. The moment you brought him into our home, you lost me. I turned to leave, but Emily grabbed my arm, desperation in her eyes. Please, James, don't leave. We can go to counseling, try to work through this, for the kids' sake. I pulled my arm away, my heart breaking. I can't stay here, Emily, not right now. I need time to think. I walked out of the house, leaving her sobbing on the couch. I needed space, a place to clear my head and figure out what to do next. I drove to a nearby hotel and checked in, feeling a profound sense of loss and emptiness. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on what mattered most, Sophie and Jack. I visited them at Emily's parents' house, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy for their sake. They sensed that something was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to explain the truth just yet. All I could do was reassure them that I loved them and that everything would be okay. I also met with a divorce lawyer, laying out the situation and discussing my options. It was a painful conversation, but necessary. I needed to protect my children and ensure that they were taken care of, no matter what happened between Emily and me. A week later, I returned home to face Emily again. She looked haggard, as if the weight of her guilt was crushing her. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared so many happy memories, now a battlefield of broken trust. I've thought about it a lot, I began, my voice steady. And I can't just forgive and forget. What you did was unforgivable. But for the sake of our children, we need to find a way to move forward. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right, to be a better mother. We're getting a divorce, I said, my voice firm. But I want joint custody. The kids need both of us in their lives, even if we can't be together. She nodded again, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I agree. I'll do whatever is best for them. The conversation was excruciating, but it was a step towards a new beginning. I still loved Emily, but the trust was shattered beyond repair. All I could do now was focus on my children and try to rebuild my life, one piece at a time. That night, I slept in the guest room, the finality of our decision sinking in. Emily and I were no longer husband and wife in any meaningful sense. We were co-parents, bound by our love for our children and the shared responsibility of raising them. It was a painful reality, but one I had to accept for the sake of Sophie and Jack. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and heartache, but I was determined to navigate it with strength and resilience, for my children and for myself. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work and focused on my kids. Emily moved into the guest room permanently, and we navigated our new reality with strained civility. The anger I felt towards her didn't subside, but I channeled it into making sure our children felt as little impact as possible from our crumbling marriage. But as time went on, the anger grew into something darker, an intense need for revenge. Emily's betrayal had shattered me, and I wanted her to feel the same pain. I couldn't let her walk away from this without facing the consequences of her actions. One evening, while the kids were at a sleepover at their grandparents' house, I decided to confront Daniel. I had found his address through some not-so-legal means, and I knew I needed to face him. I drove to his place, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and rage. When I arrived, I saw his car in the driveway. Good, I thought, he's home. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments, it opened. Daniel stood there, surprise and then fear crossing his face as he recognized me. "James," he said, his voice shaky. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk," I replied, my voice cold. "But talking is not really what I have in mind." Before he could react, I pushed my way into his house. He stumbled back, trying to keep his balance. I closed the door behind me and faced him, my fists clenched. "You slept with my wife," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You destroyed my family, and now you're going to pay for it." "Look, man, I'm sorry," Daniel stammered. "It wasn't supposed to happen. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I shouted, stepping closer. "You call ruining my life a mistake?" Without warning, I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw. He fell to the floor, and I didn't stop. I unleashed all the anger and pain I had been carrying, my fists landing blow after blow. He tried to fight back, but he was no match for my fury. The satisfaction of seeing him bloodied and helpless was immense, a twisted sense of justice. "Don't you ever come near my family again," I growled, standing over him. "If you do, I'll make sure this is the least of your worries." Leaving him on the floor, I stormed out of the house, my hands bruised and bloody. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with what I had just done. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, but also a gnawing guilt. I had stooped to his level, but I couldn't bring myself to regret it. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me. She took one look at my bloody hands and knew what had happened. "You went to see him, didn't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, I did," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "He got what he deserved." "James, this isn't the way," she said, tears in her eyes. "Violence won't solve anything. It'll only make things worse." "Don't lecture me," I snapped. "You're the reason this happened. You brought this on all of us." She recoiled as if I had struck her, but I didn't care. The anger and betrayal had hardened my heart. I walked past her, heading to the bathroom to clean up. As I washed the blood from my hands, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at me was someone I barely recognized, cold, vengeful, and consumed by pain. I knew I needed to find a way to move past this, for the sake of my children and my own sanity. The next day, I began the process of filing for divorce. I couldn't live like this anymore, and I knew that the only way to truly start healing was to cut ties with Emily. It was a painful decision, but it was the right one. Over the following weeks, I focused on rebuilding my life. I spent as much time as possible with Sophie and Jack, creating new routines and traditions to help them adjust to our new reality. I also started seeing a therapist, someone who could help me navigate the storm of emotions I was dealing with. Emily tried to reach out, to find a way to make amends, but I kept my distance. The damage was too great, and I couldn't see a future where we could ever be together again. My priority was my children, and making sure they knew they were loved and supported, no matter what. Revenge had given me a temporary sense of relief, but it didn't change the past. It didn't erase the betrayal or the pain. But it did give me a sense of closure, a way to say that I wouldn't be a victim. Now, it was time to move forward and find a way to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. The process of divorcing Emily was grueling, both emotionally and legally. We agreed to keep things as civil as possible for the sake of Sophie and Jack, but the underlying tension made every interaction feel like walking on eggshells. We both hired lawyers to navigate the complexities, and our once happy home turned into a battleground of paperwork and negotiations. The first step was deciding on custody arrangements. I wanted joint custody, believing that despite everything, Emily was still a good mother. However, I also wanted to ensure that my children were protected and had a stable environment. Emily, to her credit, didn't fight me on this. She knew that our children needed both of us and agreed to a joint custody arrangement without much dispute. Our assets were another matter. The house, our savings, investments, and even our possessions all had to be divided. Each item carried memories, making the process even more painful. I watched as our shared life was systematically dismantled and split between us. The family home was the hardest to let go. We both knew that keeping it would be too painful a reminder. So we decided to sell it and split the proceeds. The meetings with the lawyers were tense. Each discussion felt like reopening old wounds. Every decision a reminder of the betrayal that had led us here. My lawyer, a stern but compassionate woman named Karen, guided me through each step, ensuring that my interests and those of my children were protected. She encouraged me to stay focused on the bigger picture, reminding me that the end of this process would bring a new beginning. Emily's lawyer was equally professional, and together they worked to keep things as amicable as possible. Emily and I attended mediation sessions to iron out the finer details. These sessions were excruciating, forcing us to confront our issues directly. We discussed everything from holiday schedules to child support, each topic a reminder of the life we once shared and the future we now had to navigate separately. During one particularly difficult session, the mediator asked us to describe what we wanted most for our children. Emily broke down in tears, saying she wanted Sophie and Jack to grow up knowing they were loved, despite our separation. Her vulnerability in that moment reminded me of the woman I had fallen in love with, making it even harder to accept how things had turned out. "I want the same thing," I said quietly. "I want them to be happy and to know that both of their parents love them deeply." These shared sentiments became the foundation for our co-parenting agreement. We agreed to prioritize the kids' needs, putting aside our differences to ensure they felt secure and loved. The mediator helped us create a detailed plan, covering everything from school events to vacations. We both signed it, a bittersweet moment that signified both an ending and a new beginning. The day we went to court to finalize the divorce was somber. Emily and I barely spoke, the weight of our history hanging heavily between us. The judge reviewed our agreement, asked a few questions, and then declared our marriage officially dissolved. It was over. As I left the courthouse, a mix of emotions washed over me. Relief, sadness, anger, and a strange sense of freedom. Emily and I exchanged a final weary glance before going our separate ways. It felt surreal, the end of a chapter that had defined so much of my life. In the weeks following the divorce, I focused on creating a new routine for Sophie, Jack, and myself. I moved into a new apartment, modest but comfortable, and decorated it to make it feel like home. The kids adjusted surprisingly well, their resilience a constant source of strength for me. I threw myself into my work, grateful for the distraction and the sense of purpose it provided. My colleagues knew I was going through a tough time and offered their support. Paul, a close friend from the office, became a confidant, someone I could talk to about the complexities of my new life. Emily and I maintained a civil relationship for the sake of the kids. We attended school events together, coordinated schedules, and made an effort to communicate effectively. It wasn't easy, but we managed. The kids seemed to appreciate our efforts, and their smiles were a reminder that we were doing something right. One evening, as I was helping Sophie with her homework, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes and asked, "Dad, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. I paused, considering my answer. "I'm getting there, sweetie," I replied, giving her a reassuring smile. "It's going to take some time, but we're going to be okay." The divorce had been a painful, necessary step towards healing. It marked the end of a significant part of my life, but it also opened the door to new possibilities. I was determined to rebuild, to find happiness again, and to be the best father I could be. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. Months passed, and slowly, the raw pain of betrayal and divorce began to fade. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that I never expected but had come to accept. The kids were my anchor, their laughter and innocence a constant reminder of what was truly important. I made it a point to be present in their lives, attending every school event, helping with homework, and creating new traditions that were just for us. I also started to focus on myself. Therapy sessions with Dr. Ellis continued, helping me navigate the complex emotions I was dealing with. He encouraged me to explore my interests and passions, to rediscover who I was outside of my roles as a husband and father. I took up running again, finding solace in the physical exertion and the quiet moments of reflection it provided. I even joined a local photography club, something I had always wanted to do but never found the time for. Emily and I maintained a cordial co-parenting relationship. We communicated regularly about the kids, coordinating schedules and discussing their needs. There were still moments of tension, but we both tried to keep things civil for Sophie and Jack's sake. Over time, the anger I felt towards her began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of acceptance. She had made terrible choices, but I realized that holding on to my anger would only hurt me and the kids. One sunny Saturday morning, I was at the park with Sophie and Jack. They were playing on the swings, their laughter filling the air, when I noticed a woman sitting on a nearby bench. She was watching her own child play, a little boy who seemed about Jack's age. She looked up and smiled at me, and I found myself smiling back. Her name was Anna, and she had recently moved to the area with her son, Max. We struck up a conversation, finding common ground in our shared experiences as single parents. There was an immediate connection, a sense of ease that I hadn't felt in a long time. We exchanged numbers, promising to meet up again for a play date with the kids. As the weeks went by, Anna and I grew closer. We would meet at the park, go for coffee, and sometimes have dinner together with the kids. She was kind, understanding, and had a warmth that drew me in. Our conversations were effortless, and for the first time since the divorce, I felt a genuine spark of happiness. One evening, after a particularly fun day at the park, Anna and I sat on my front porch, watching the kids play in the yard. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. We talked about our lives, our hopes for the future, and the challenges we had faced. "You're a great dad, James," Anna said, her eyes meeting mine. "Sophie and Jack are lucky to have you." "Thanks, Anna," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. "You're an amazing mom, too. Max is a wonderful kid." There was a moment of silence, a comfortable one, as we both seemed to reflect on how far we had come. I realized that I was no longer defined by the pain of the past, but by the possibilities of the future. As the months turned into a year, my relationship with Anna deepened. We supported each other, shared our dreams, and found joy in the little moments. Sophie, Jack, and Max became fast friends, their laughter a constant soundtrack to our lives. It wasn't always easy. There were challenges and moments of doubt, but we faced them together. Looking back on everything, I realized that the journey I had been on was one of transformation. I had been shattered by betrayal, but I had also been given the chance to rebuild, to rediscover who I was, and to create a new life filled with love and hope. Emily's betrayal had been a catalyst for change, forcing me to confront my fears and ultimately find a path to healing and happiness. One evening, as Anna and I watched the kids play in the yard, she turned to me and said, "You know, James, life has a funny way of bringing us to where we need to be." I smiled, taking her hand in mine. "Yeah, it does. I never thought I'd be here, but I'm grateful for it." We sat there, hand in hand, watching the sunset, knowing that the future was bright and filled with endless possibilities. The pain of the past had given way to a new beginning, one that I was ready to embrace with open arms. I had found love again, not just with Anna, but with myself and the life I was building. And for that, I was truly thankful.